The warning alarm screamed through Lieutenant Han Solo's cockpit as his scout ship tumbled through the void. Sparks flew from damaged control panels while emergency lights bathed everything in an eerie red glow. His engines were dead. Life support was failing, and he was millions of miles from the nearest human outpost. "Come on, you piece of junk," Han Solo muttered, frantically working the controls. 3 days ago, he'd been on a routine patrol mission along the outer rim. Now he was stranded in uncharted space, praying his distress beacon would reach someone friendly before his oxygen ran out. That's when the shadows appeared. At first, Han Solo thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The starfield seemed to shimmer and bend, like looking through water. Then the cloaking fields dropped and his blood turned to ice. 5 massive warships materialized around his tiny scout vessel, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian. Each ship was easily 50 times larger than his own, bristling with weapons that could vaporize him in an instant. The Vectari had found him. Han Solo had heard whispers about them in spacer bars and military briefings. The Vectari Empire was ancient and ruthless, spreading across the galaxy like a plague. They didn't conquer worlds for resources or territory. They collected species like trophies, gathering the most dangerous creatures from 1,000 worlds for their sick entertainment. His communications array crackled to life, filled with static and an otherworldly hum. When the voice came through, it was like listening to a machine trying to imitate speech. Cold, emotionless, and terrifying. "Human vessel, you will surrender immediately. Resistance is futile." Han Solo's hand moved toward his weapon controls. But what was the point? His ship's guns were like throwing pebbles at a mountain. The Vectari ships moved with predatory grace, their formations tightening around him like a noose. I repeat, surrender now or be destroyed. Through his viewport, Han Solo could see strange energy patterns dancing between the alien ships, some kind of tractor beam technology he'd never encountered before. Blue lightning arced toward his vessel, wrapping around the hull like glowing chains. His ship jerked violently as the energy bonds took hold. The control stick went dead in his hands. He was being reeled in like a fish on a line, helpless to resist. The largest Vectari ship's belly opened like a hungry mouth, revealing a cavernous hangar bay filled with captured vessels from dozens of different species. "Welcome to the collection, human," the voice said, with what might have been amusement. Han Solo's scout ship was dragged inside, where mechanical arms grabbed it and secured it to the deck. Atmosphere flooded the bay, and he could hear the hiss of equalizing pressure. Through the viewports of other captured ships, he caught glimpses of their former pilots. Some were species he recognized, others were completely alien. All looked terrified. Vectari soldiers materialized through the walls using some kind of phase-shifting technology. They were tall and gaunt, their bodies covered in biomechanical armor that seemed to be part of their actual flesh. Glowing eyes stared at him through helmet visors, and when they moved, their joints whirred softly like well-oiled machines. The boarding process was swift and efficient. Han Solo barely had time to grab his emergency kit before they hauled him from his ship. The Vectari didn't speak to him directly, communicating through electronic chirps and whistles that their translator units converted into cold mechanical orders. Hours blurred together as he was processed like cargo. Medical scanners examined every inch of his body while he was restrained on a metal table. Data tablets displayed his species classification, physical capabilities, and psychological profile. The Vectari studied humans the same way scientists might study an interesting insect. Finally, they dragged him through corridors that stretched on forever, past viewing chambers where other captured beings were displayed like museum pieces. The ship was massive beyond imagination, a floating city dedicated to collecting and cataloging the galaxy's most dangerous life forms. The arena appeared ahead like something from a nightmare. Thousands of Vectari filled tiered seating around, a central pit, their electronic voices creating a buzzing symphony of anticipation. Holographic displays showed betting odds and previous combat statistics. This wasn't just entertainment for them, it was a science. The lead Vectari commander stood on a raised platform, his armor more elaborate than the others. When he spoke, his voice boomed through the arena's speakers. "Citizens of the Empire, today we present a new specimen for evaluation. Observe this human. a species known for their primitive emotions and weak physical capabilities. Laughter echoed through the arena, a sound like grinding metal. We shall test their survival instincts against our prize Drakmori. The beasts have not fed in 7 cycles. They are eager. Hansol looked down into the pit below. It was easily 40 feet deep, with smooth walls impossible to climb. At the bottom, 3 massive shapes moved in the shadows. He could hear them breathing, low rumbles that made his bones vibrate. The commander raised his arm dramatically. "Let the evaluation begin." The floor beneath Hansol's feet suddenly gave way. As he plummeted into darkness, the crowd's roar followed him down, hungry for blood and spectacle. His last thought before hitting the ground was that the Vektari had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The impact drove every bit of air from Hansol's lungs as he crashed onto the cold metal floor. Pain shot through his ribs and shoulder, but he forced himself to stay conscious. Above him, the opening sealed shut with a grinding sound of heavy machinery, cutting off the arena lights and plunging him into near darkness. The crowd's bloodthirsty cheers echoed down from somewhere far above, muffled but still hungry for violence. Emergency lighting strips along the walls cast an eerie blue glow across the massive chamber, revealing just how trapped he really was. The cell was enormous, easily the size of a football field, with walls that stretched up into shadow. That's when he heard the breathing, deep rhythmic sounds that made his chest vibrate. Not one creature, but 3. Hansol rolled onto his side, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs, and tried to focus his eyes in the dim light. What he saw made his blood freeze. 3 pairs of glowing amber eyes stared at him from the darkness. They weren't just large, they were massive beyond anything he'd ever imagined. The smallest was the size of a city bus, while the largest could have swallowed a small spacecraft whole. Their breathing created small clouds of steam in the cool air, and he could hear the soft scrape of claws against metal as they moved. Drakmori, the Vektari's prize killers. The creatures began to emerge from the shadows, and Hansol got his first clear look at them. They moved like a cross between dragons and lions, their powerful bodies covered in scales that shifted color in the light. Wings folded against their backs, too large for flight in this enclosed space, but still intimidating as hell. Each step they took echoed through the chamber like thunder. The crowd above grew louder, sensing that the show was about to begin. The largest Drakmori approached first, its head easily the size of a small car. Scars crisscrossed its snout and neck, telling stories of countless battles in this very arena. Its amber eyes burned with an intelligence that caught Hansol completely off guard. This wasn't some mindless beast. This was a thinking, feeling creature that had learned to hate. Every instinct screamed at Hansol to run, to find a corner, and make his last stand. But there was nowhere to go, and something deeper than instinct told him that running would be the worst possible choice. These creatures were hunters, evolved to chase prey. Running would only trigger their kill response. Instead, Hansol did something that shocked the watching Vektari into momentary silence. Slowly pushed himself up to his knees, wincing at the pain in his shoulder, and raised both hands with palms open, not in surrender, but in a gesture as old as humanity itself, showing that he carried no weapons, posed no threat. Then he lowered his head, not in fear but in respect, the way he'd seen animal trainers work with dangerous predators back on Earth. The massive Drakmori stopped dead in its tracks, tilting its enormous head to one side. Steam puffed from its nostrils as it studied this strange new behavior. The other 2 creatures had been moving to flank Hansol, but their leader's confusion made them pause as well. "Easy there, big guy," Hansol whispered, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "I'm not here to hurt you. Neither of us chose to be in this place." The Drakmori leaned closer, its hot breath washing over Hansol like a furnace. This close he could see the intricate patterns in its scales, the way old scars had healed over muscle and bone. But what struck him most were its eyes. They held pain, yes, but also curiosity. When was the last time anything in this arena had shown it respect instead of fear? Hansol noticed something else that made his heart ache. Fresh wounds covered the creature's flanks, poorly treated cuts that were infected and weeping. Burn marks from energy weapons dotted its hide. The Vektari didn't just use these magnificent beings for entertainment. They tortured them to make them more vicious. They hurt you too, didn't they? Hansol said softly, his voice filled with genuine sympathy. We're all prisoners here. The Drakmori's eyes widened slightly, as if it understood more than just his tone. Its massive head came even closer, until Hansol could feel the warmth radiating from its scales. The creature was studying him with the same intensity he was. Studying it. The other two Drakmori had crept closer during this exchange, their own eyes glowing with curiosity rather than hunger. One was slightly smaller than the leader, with darker scales and a more serpentine build. The third was broader, with a thick neck and powerful shoulders that spoke of incredible strength. All three bore similar scars and wounds. Above them, the Vektari crowd was growing restless. This wasn't the bloodbath they'd paid to see. Electronic voices chittered with confusion and growing anger. Some began throwing objects down into the pit, chunks of metal and refuse that clattered harmlessly around the prisoners. But Hansol ignored the crowd completely. His attention was focused on the magnificent creature before him, and the growing realization that he might have found allies rather than executioners. The Drakmori's breathing had changed, becoming slower and less aggressive. Its tail, which had been lashing dangerously just moments before, now lay still against the floor. The leader made a sound deep in its throat, not quite a growl, but something softer, almost conversational. Hansol found himself responding without thinking, making a similar low sound that seemed to resonate through his chest. The effect was immediate. All three Drakmori straightened up, their eyes widening with what looked like surprise. Had they been trying to communicate all along, only to be met with screams and weapons from previous prisoners? Hansol slowly extended one hand, moving with deliberate care. The lead Drakmori watched his movement intently, ready to strike if this was some kind of trick. But when Hansol's fingers barely brushed against the creature's snout, something remarkable happened. The great beast closed its eyes and leaned into the touch, a sound like a massive cat's purr rumbling from deep within its chest. The first morning. In the cell, if you could call it morning in a place without sun, Hansol woke to find all three Drakmori watching him sleep, not with hunger in their eyes, but with something that looked almost like protectiveness. During the night, they had positioned themselves around him like guardians, shielding him from the cold metal walls. The largest one, who Hansol had started thinking of as the leader, made a soft, rumbling sound when he stirred. It was almost like a greeting. Hansol sat up slowly, his body still aching from the fall, and smiled at the massive creature. "Good morning to you too, big guy," he said quietly. "I think I'll call you Deho. You remind me of my old squad leader, tough as nails but looks out for everyone." The Drakmori tilted its head at the sound of its new name, amber eyes gleaming, with what seemed like approval. The second creature, sleeker and more agile-looking, got the name Jin Wu after Hansol's former wingman who could fly through asteroid fields like they were empty space. The third, broader and more powerful, became Taemin, named after the squad's heavy weapons specialist who could punch through ship armor with his bare fists. When breakfast arrived, if you could call the nutrient paste that dropped from a slot, in the wall breakfast, Hansol made a decision that shocked the watching Vektari guards. Instead of eating the meager portion himself, he divided it into 4 parts. The Drakmori had received no food at all, part of the Vektari strategy to keep them aggressive and hungry. "Here," Hansol said, offering portions to each of his cellmates. "We'll share everything in here." Deho stared at the offered food for a long moment, then looked back at Hansol with something that might have been confusion. When was the last time anyone had shown them kindness? The great creature lowered its massive head and gently took the food, careful not to hurt Hansol with its razor-sharp teeth. The other two followed their leader's example, and for the first time since their capture, the Drakmori ate without having to fight for every scrap. Above them, the Vektari guards chittered angrily in their electronic language. This wasn't how their arena was supposed to work. Prisoners were meant to fight, to provide entertainment, not to form alliances. But there was nothing in their protocols about this situation. Over the following days, Hansol began to understand just how intelligent his new companions really were. When he tore strips from his uniform to clean their infected wounds, they held perfectly still, understanding that he was trying to help. Jinwoo even extended his wing to give Han Sol better access to a particularly nasty burn mark. "The Vektari really did a number on you guys," Han Sol muttered as he worked, using water from the cell's single tap to clean away dried blood and infection. "These wounds are weeks old. They just left you to suffer." Taemin made a low growling sound that definitely wasn't directed at Han Sol. The big Drakmori's eyes burned with hatred when he looked up toward the arena above. Han Sol could feel the creature's rage like heat from a furnace. But the real breakthrough came on the third day when Han Sol started drawing in the thin layer of dust that covered parts of the cell floor. He sketched simple pictures, a stick figure representing himself, 3 dragon shapes for his companions, and the circular symbol he'd seen on Vektari ships. Dai-Ho watched intently as Han Sol drew, then did something amazing. The great creature extended one claw and began making marks in the dust beside Han Sol's drawings. Not random scratches, but deliberate symbols that clearly meant something. "You can write," Han Sol breathed in amazement. "You have language." What followed was the most incredible conversation of Han Sol's life. Through pictures, gestures, and symbols scratched in the dust, the Drakmori began to tell their story. It was a tale that made Han Sol's blood boil with rage. The Drakmori had once been a proud spacefaring species, soaring between stars in ships designed like massive versions of themselves. They had been explorers and artists, creating beautiful crystal cities on a dozen worlds. Their society had been built on honor, family bonds, and the freedom of flight. Then the Vektari came. The invasion had been swift and brutal. The Drakmoris, ships built for beauty rather than war, were no match for Vektari weapons. Those who weren't killed outright were captured and enslaved. The strongest were brought to arenas like this one, forced to fight for the entertainment of their conquerors. Jinwoo scratched a symbol that clearly showed ships burning, his elegant claw work depicting the fall of his civilization with heartbreaking detail. Taemin added marks that showed Drakmori in chains, being dragged away from their families. "How long?" Han Sol asked, pointing to symbols that might represent time. Daeho's response made Han Sol's heart sink. If he was reading the symbols correctly, the Drakmori had been slaves for over a century. Generations had lived and died in captivity, their culture slowly being erased by Vektari cruelty. But there was something else in their crude writing. Hope. When Han Sol had first shown them kindness, something long buried had awakened in these magnificent beings. They began to remember what it felt like to trust, to hope for something better than endless fighting and pain. The Vektari guards noticed the change too. The electronic chatter from above became more frequent and agitated. Some guards even descended partway into the cell to observe, their glowing eyes studying this unprecedented situation. They took recordings, probably reporting back to their superiors about this strange development. "Let them watch," Han Sol said to his companions as he worked on cleaning another infected wound on Taemin's shoulder. "They think they understand us, but they don't have a clue." Han Sol had been studying the cell too, noting every detail, every weakness. The walls were smooth metal, but there were ventilation grates, power conduits, and access panels. The Vektari had built this prison to contain mindless beasts, not intelligent beings working together. On the 5th day, as he sat surrounded by his unlikely friends, Han Sol made a promise that would change everything. "We're getting out of here," he said firmly, pointing upward toward the arena and the freedom beyond. "All of us. I don't care how long it takes or what we have to do. Nobody deserves to live like this." Daeho studied Han Sol's face for a long moment, those ancient amber eyes seeming to look straight into his soul. Then the great creature made a sound deep in his throat, not quite a roar, not quite a purr, but something that sounded remarkably like agreement. Jinwoo and Taemin added their voices to their leaders, and for the first time in over a century, the sound of hope echoed through the Vektari arena. Above them, the guards scrambled to make sense of what they were hearing. But they would never understand the bond that had formed in the depths of their prison, a bond that would soon bring their entire empire to its knees. The morning of the 7th day brought unexpected visitors to their cell. Han Sol woke to the sound of mechanical whirring and electronic beeping echoing from above. Through the dim lighting, He could see platforms descending from the arena ceiling, carrying a team of Vectari scientists and their equipment. "Well, this is new," Hansol muttered, sitting up slowly. His three companions were already alert, their amber eyes tracking every movement above. Daiho positioned himself protectively in front of Hansol, a low growl rumbling in his massive chest. The lead scientist, distinguished by more elaborate biomechanical armor and glowing neural implants, spoke into a recording device as his platform touched down. Day 7 of observation. Subject shows unprecedented bonding behavior with Class A predators. Proceeding with direct analysis. Hansol had to admire their confidence, even if it was about to get them killed. The Vectari had ruled the galaxy for millennia through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. They'd never encountered anything they couldn't understand, catalog, and control. That arrogance was about to become their downfall. "Stay calm," Hansol whispered to his companions in the simple language they'd developed together. "Let them get close. When I move, you move." The scientists approached with typical Vectari boldness, their energy shields crackling around them. Like protective bubbles, they carried scanning devices that hummed and clicked, taking readings of everything in the cell. The lead scientist seemed particularly fascinated by the symbols Hansol and the Drakmori had scratched in the dirt. "Remarkable," the scientist muttered, his translator converting his electronic speech into words Hansol could understand. "The primitive appears to have established basic communication with the specimens. This could revolutionize our understanding of cross-species domestication." Hansol almost laughed at that. Domestication? These fools thought he'd become some kind of animal trainer, putting on a show for their amusement. They had no idea they were looking at a tactical alliance between 4 of the deadliest beings in the galaxy. The scientist gestured to his assistants, who began setting up more equipment. "Deploy the neural scanners. I want to understand how this human's primitive brain is processing fear responses. The specimens should have killed him within minutes of contact." That's when Hansol noticed something crucial. The energy shields the scientists wore were designed to protect against the Drakmori's claws and fire breath, but they were focused downward, protecting against attacks from below. The scientists had positioned themselves with their backs to the cell walls, confident that nothing could approach them from behind. They'd forgotten that humans were climbers. During his days in the cell, Hansol had memorized every surface, every projection, every possible handhold. While the Vectari had been watching his bonding with the Drakmori, he'd been planning. The ventilation grates, the power conduits, the lighting fixtures, everything could be used. The lead scientist moved closer to examine the communication symbols, his shield generator humming softly. Fascinating. The neural pathways required for this level of interspecies cooperation shouldn't exist in such a primitive brain structure. "Primitive," Hansol repeated quietly, flexing his hands. "That's your second mistake. The first was coming." Down here." The scientist looked up, confused by the human's calm tone. "Specimen is exhibiting unusual confidence levels. Recommend immediate neural suppression to prevent—" Hansol exploded into motion. Years of military training kicked in as he launched himself at the nearest wall, using a damaged light fixture to swing up and around behind the first assistant. His improvised weapon, a sharp piece of metal he'd quietly worked loose from the wall over several days, found the weak point in the Vectari's armor with surgical precision. The alien's scream was cut short as his shield generator overloaded and sparked. Hansol was already moving, rolling under the second assistant's frantic energy blast and coming up with the dead Vectari's weapon in his hands. But he wasn't alone. Daiho, Jinwoo, and Taimin moved like they'd been born to hunt together. The Big Drakmori had been watching Hansol's preparations for days, learning his tactics, understanding his strategy. When their human packmate struck, they struck with him. Daiho's massive jaws clamped down on the lead scientist's shield generator, crushing the device like an eggshell. Without protection, the Vectari was helpless against Jinwoo's razor-sharp claws. Taimin used his incredible strength to grab the third assistant and slam him against the cell wall with bone-crushing force. The entire attack took less than 30 seconds. Above in the arena, the Vectari commander stood frozen in shock, his Electronic voice crackling with disbelief. Impossible. Scans showed the human had no significant combat capabilities. He displayed empathy, cooperation, non-aggressive behavior patterns. Han Sol looked up at the commander while casually stripping equipment from the dead scientists. Around him, his Drakmori companions searched the bodies with methodical efficiency, their intelligence and adaptability on full display. "That's the thing about humans," Han Sol called up to the watching aliens. "We're really good at making friends. But we're even better at protecting them." The commander's biomechanical form trembled with rage and fear. "You are just one primitive species. You cannot comprehend the power of the Vektari Empire?" Han Sol smiled as he activated one of the captured energy weapons, its familiar weight settling into his hands like it belonged there. Behind him, Dae-ho was examining a shield generator with curious intelligence, while Jinwoo and Taemin flanked the cell's entrance like professional soldiers. "See, that's where you're wrong," Han Sol said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. "I'm not just one anything. We're a pack now, and you just declared war on all of us." Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the facility as Han Sol methodically began dismantling the cell's security systems with tools taken from the dead scientists. Each lock, each barrier, each failsafe fell to his combination of human ingenuity and Vektari technology. The Drakmori watched and learned, their ancient minds adapting to concepts they'd been denied for over a century. They weren't just prisoners anymore. They weren't just gladiators or specimens or entertainment. They were soldiers in a war they were finally going to win. Above them, the commander was screaming orders in the electronic chittering of his language, calling for reinforcements, for lockdown protocols, for anything that might contain this unprecedented disaster. But it was already too late. The Vektari had made the ultimate tactical error. They'd given a human time to think, space to plan, and the most dangerous allies in the galaxy. Now they were about to learn why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most persistent survivors. The hunt was about to begin. The security doors exploded outward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal as Han Sol and his Drakmori pack burst into the main prison complex. Emergency lighting bathed everything in pulsing red, and the sound of alarms created a symphony of chaos that echoed through the massive facility. "This way," Han Sol shouted over the noise, consulting the facility map he'd downloaded from the dead scientists' equipment. The Vektari prison ship was enormous, more like a floating city than a vessel, with hundreds of holding cells spread across dozens of levels. Dae-ho took point, his massive form smashing through security barriers, like they were made of paper. Behind him, Jinwoo and Taemin moved with deadly grace, their combat instincts fully awakened after years of forced dormancy. They weren't just following Han Sol anymore, they were hunting alongside him as equals. The first wave of Vektari guards appeared at the end of the corridor, their energy weapons charging with high-pitched whines. But they hesitated for just a moment, confused by what they were seeing. These weren't mindless beasts running wild. This was a coordinated military assault. That hesitation cost them everything. Han Sol dropped and rolled, his captured weapon laying down covering fire, while Dae-ho charged straight through the center of the guard formation. The massive Drakmori's roar shook the walls as he scattered the aliens like bowling pins. Jinwoo came in from the left flank, his serpentine agility allowing him to dodge energy blasts that would have vaporized a lesser creature. Taemin simply bulldozed through the right side, his incredible strength turning Vektari battle armor into scrap metal. "Cell Block 7 is just ahead," Han Sol called out, checking his stolen scanner. "That's where they're keeping the recent captures." The heavy security door blocking their path bore warnings in a dozen alien languages. Extreme. Danger. Authorized personnel only. Lethal force authorized. Han Sol almost laughed. After what they'd already been through, a locked door seemed like a minor inconvenience. Taemin solved the problem by simply punching through the reinforced barrier, his claws tearing through metal plating like it was tissue paper. Beyond lay a corridor lined with containment cells, each one holding prisoners from across the galaxy. The first cell contained a group of crystalline beings who pulsed with inner light. The second held what looked like living trees, their bark scarred by weapon burns. A third contained creatures that seemed to be made of pure energy, flickering weakly behind force field barriers. "Everyone out!" Han Sol shouted, using the scientists' access codes to unlock cell after cell. "We're leaving this place." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of alien species poured from their prisons, some roaring with rage, others weeping with joy. Many were weak from captivity, but their spirits burned bright with the promise of freedom. A massive, insectoid creature, easily 8 feet tall with razor-sharp mandibles, approached Han Sol cautiously. When it spoke, its voice buzzed like a swarm of angry bees. "Human," it said in heavily accented galactic standard. "You are the one who leads this rebellion." "I'm the one who started it," Han Sol replied, helping a wounded feline-like alien to its feet. "But we're all leading it now. Every one of us who refuses to stay caged." The insectoid's multifaceted eyes gleamed with approval. "I am Kriktak of the Zephyr Hives. My people remember humans from the old stories. You are the species that never gives up." "That's us," Han Sol said with a grim smile. Stubborn to a fault, more prisoners joined their growing army as they fought through level after level. Each group brought their own unique abilities to the rebellion. The crystalline beings could focus energy into devastating beams. The tree-like creatures could regrow damaged limbs and heal others. The energy beings could disrupt Vectari electronics just by touching them. But it was the coordination that terrified their captors. Under Han Sol's leadership, this diverse collection of species fought like a single organism, each group supporting the others, covering weaknesses, amplifying strengths. The Vectari threw everything they had at the rebels. Battle drones swarmed the corridors, their weapons chattering with deadly precision. Heavy combat units deployed energy shields and plasma cannons. Automated defense systems turned entire sections of the ship into kill zones. None of it mattered. Han Sol had spent his entire military career learning to fight against superior technology and overwhelming odds. Every human did. It was what made them dangerous. They'd learned to win wars they had no business surviving. "Daeho, take your team and secure the hangar bay," Han Sol ordered as they reached a major intersection. "Jinwoo, I need you to find the communications center and jam their distress signals. Taemin, you're with me. We're going to have a conversation with whoever's running this circus." The command center was a fortress within a fortress, protected by layer upon layer of security systems. But the Vectari had designed their defenses to keep prisoners in, not to keep determined attackers out. Han Sol and his growing army carved through the barriers like a hot knife through butter. When they finally breached the main doors, they found the Vectari commander backed against his command chair, his biomechanical form trembling with terror. Around him, his bridge crew cowered behind overturned consoles, their electronic voices chittering with panic. "This is impossible," the commander stammered, his translator struggling to process his fear-distorted speech. "You are just one human, one primitive species among thousands. You cannot defeat the Vectari Empire." Han Sol stepped forward, flanked by Daeho and dozens of liberated prisoners representing scores of different worlds. Behind them, more freed captives streamed onto the bridge, their eyes burning with justified rage. "See, that's where you got it wrong from the beginning," Han Sol said, his voice calm and deadly. "I was never just one human. Humans don't work alone. We make allies. We build teams. We turn enemies into friends and strangers into family." Gestured to the incredible diversity of beings surrounding him. "You thought you were collecting trophies, specimens for your entertainment. But what you really did was give me the best military unit in the galaxy." The commander's eyes darted frantically between the assembled prisoners. "This changes nothing. The Empire spans 1,000 worlds. You cannot—" "Already have," Jinwoo interrupted, his serpentine form coiled around the communications console. "Distress signals jammed. Navigation systems hacked. Your friends don't even know you're in trouble." From the hangar bay, Taemin's triumphant roar echoed through the ship's speakers. The big Drakmori had secured their escape route and was already preparing captured vessels for launch. Han Sol looked out through the command center's massive viewports at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there were more Vectari facilities, more prisons, more innocent beings waiting for liberation. "Consider this your resignation letter," he told the cowering commander. "The Vectari Empire just lost its first war." Within hours, a fleet of liberated vessels burst from the prison ship's hangar bays. Han Sol piloted the lead vessel, a sleek Vectari command cruiser that he'd already started modifying with help from his diverse crew. Daeho occupied the co-pilot's seat, his massive claws surprisingly delicate on the control surfaces. Jin Woo monitored communications while Tai Min handled weapons systems. Behind them flew dozens of other ships, each crewed by former prisoners who had found their strength again. The crystalline beings piloted ships that sparkled like jewels. The insectoid Kriktak commanded a vessel buzzing with his warrior drones. The energy beings had merged with their ship's computers, creating hybrid vessels unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. As they jumped to hyperspace, leaving the burning Vectari stronghold behind them, Han Sol felt something he hadn't experienced since his capture. Hope for the future. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that shows mercy first, builds bridges instead of walls, and turns enemies into allies. The Vectari Empire had ruled through fear and isolation for millennia. Now they were about to face an enemy they couldn't understand, a coalition of species united not by conquest, but by friendship. The end.